Okay, we're back. We're live. I'm Jay Fidell. This is ThinkTech Global. I'm standing in for David Day. This is normally his host time for ThinkTech Global. Hi, David. I hope you're feeling better. And today our special guest is Rebbetzin Pearl Krasnjansky from Chabad of Hawaii. She's the Rebbetzin to Rabbi Itchel Krasnjansky of Chabad of Hawaii, and she's honored us by coming down today to talk about an extremely important topic. And that is, and I quote, our response to the massacre in Jerusalem. This is part, I guess, of our ongoing series about the Middle East Roundtable. So thank you very much, Pearl, for coming down.
Thank you, Jay, for having me.
So I guess first we ought to have people understand who you are. So what does it mean to be a rabbi's wife, a Rebbetzin?
Oh, that's a toughie. Well, we came here to Honolulu from Brooklyn. 27, almost 28 years, and we're fortunate enough to have 7 children, of which 5 are totally Kama'aina, because they were born here, and we came with 2 babies, so they're all Kama'aina, and we have 5 grandchildren, thank God, that are also Kama'aina kids. What does it mean to be a Rebbetzin? It's 24/7. It's a full-time job. We are a Jewish educational and social service organization, and we basically provide for any spiritual need in the community and physical needs. We've had people turn to us. We've had homeless or indigent or people in prison, people in hospitals. And as you can imagine, that is a full-time job. We do not have a lot of staff. We do have a lot of wonderful volunteers in our congregation, but full-time staff, it's my husband, myself, and our office manager. So that means I cook for the congregation and send out emails.
Pearl is a fabulous cook. I mean, we're talking fabulous.
Thank you.
Everything she makes is out of this world.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
You need to talk to my children. Okay. So, you know, so it's just, it's Hebrew school, it's adult education, it's ministering to people in hospitals and the entire life cycle from birth to death. So the entire human experience, that's our responsibility.
Yeah. Well, that's a huge thing. I mean, people need that kind of structure, that kind of support in their lives, and you offer that to your congregation.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
That's what we're here to do.
Tell us about Chabad of Hawaii. You have a picture of Rabbi Schneerson, with the founder.
Oh, yes. Okay. So actually, the Rebbe, as he is universally known, he's the Lubavitch Rebbe. The Rebbe is the leader of the Chabad Lubavitch Hasidic movement, what generally is called by the media ultra-Orthodox or Haredi. Chabad is a Hasidic group, which means that its intellectual philosophy is based in Jewish mysticism. The group is actually was actually founded in the mid-18th century, the 1700s, by the first Rebbe, and this Rebbe was the 7th in a chain of leaders. He was a very powerful personality and still remains so even 20 years after his death in 1994. Thousands and hundreds of thousands of people flocked to his headquarters in Brooklyn, seeking advice, seeking blessing. He would speak often publicly, very often, on all kinds of subjects, on subjects ranging from, and subjects of Jewish interest and academic Jewish subjects, as well as subjects pertaining to every human being, about morality, the state of education in the United States, the role of United States as superpower, and all the vast arena of all human subjects and feelings. Now, we are lucky enough and blessed enough to have been picked by the Rebbe to open up a Chabad center here to meet the needs of the Jewish community, although I will say that we do obviously have interaction with the community at large. When there is a need or request, we've had, as I mentioned earlier in our conversation, churches come visit us. I speak biannually at University of Hawaii Nursing School. So our area of effort is primarily concentrated in the Jewish community with outreach, or I should say assistance to the general community when requested.
So now we get to the question of, you know, what happened this past Tuesday in Jerusalem. It was a shock, you know, and so many people, before I even saw it in the paper, were telling me about it. Then I started reading about it, about the massacre in the temple, in the shul in Jerusalem, and it was awful, just awful. But tell us your view of it. Tell us what happened.
Okay. Well, let me tell you where I was when I heard. It was one of those shocking moments. It's like when JFK was assassinated, whoever was around remembered it for their lifetime where they stood, and I think I will remember this for a lifetime. I was actually in a teachers' meeting with my Sunday school teachers, my Hebrew school teachers, when all of a sudden my phone just started beeping, beeping, beeping with messages. And I look down, and it's my niece in Toronto, and it's 1 a.m. in Toronto. I'm thinking, what is so important? So I interrupt my meeting to look down, and I start hearing the horrific news. I hope I can get through this in one piece. But essentially what happened was that Tuesday morning at 7 a.m., there were Jewish men at prayer in a synagogue in Jerusalem.
The morning prayer.
Their morning
every
prayer.
morning you
Yes,
go to...
yes, and they rose early to do their morning prayers before they go to work or whatever their daily schedule was. They were wrapped in their prayer shawls. They were wearing what's called tefillin, which in English are translated as phylacteries, which are sacred objects of prayer. These men were not in a hotly contested area. They were in Jerusalem proper. They were minding their own business, and they were doing private, holy devotions. And
There was the silent Amida
yes,
at the time.
absolutely, which is the apex of the prayer, and that's why you're silent when you're praying to God. There's no one talking or singing at the moment. And 2 Arabs who worked in a local grocery store and knew the people of the neighborhood walked in with knives, guns, and meat cleavers, axes, and started literally hacking away, shooting people point blank in the face and hacking away at people's limbs. This is something that is so barbaric, the mind just cannot comprehend. And I only saw pictures on the internet. And I have to tell you, Jay, people were lying in puddles of their own blood. It was difficult to look at. And we are 10,000 miles away. I cannot even imagine what the worshipers in that prayer service were feeling when they were observing this and trying to
Make sense of it.
deal with what was going on, trying to escape with their lives, trying to save their fellow worshipers that were at prayer, that were in a moment of godly conversation. This is not to be believed. There are no words. Barbarity, massacre, bloodbath, all these words do not even begin to convey the horror of what occurred on Tuesday morning.
One paramedic slipped in a pool of blood, fell down, broke his leg.
And that actually saved his life.
Yeah,
That
because
actually
it was
saved
still
his
going
life.
on when this
Yes,
happened.
the response was incredible. The Israeli police force responded within 7 minutes. But nonetheless, there is a great tragedy. 26 children were left orphans by this attack. I believe actually the count is now 27 if we count the little baby, the policeman.
The policeman's
Yes.
baby.
So we have 4 men cut down in the prime of their life, many other injured, some of them critically. 3 of the men were American citizens. 1 was a British citizen. They held dual citizenship. There's a Canadian that is wounded critically. They don't know if he will survive, and if he will survive, they are questioning the quality of his life. He has severe brain damage. His brain was hacked with a meat cleaver, Jay. There are no words. There are no words.
And one of the other victims was hacked in the back with a
Yes.
meat cleaver.
Yes.
This shows you the nature of this attack.
I read an account of a woman who was an eyewitness. She just looked out her window and she heard screaming, and she started walking towards the synagogue, and she said she saw people running out with some of their limbs missing, with half of their faces cut away. And we thought we live in a civilized world.
No. And I add that, in my reading, 11 people have been killed in the past month in increasing brutality terror attacks in Israel. One of them was a baby.
3 months old.
3-month-old baby.
And the parents waited years. They
To
had
have this
clearly
baby.
fertility issues. They waited years to have this child. A 3-month-old child. For no other reason than that child was a Jew. An Israeli and a Jew. That's the only reason that baby was killed.
So I guess let's take a short break and come back and try to put this in perspective if we can. It's extremely emotional,
Yes.
extremely shocking. I mean, once you know about it, as you say, it's like the Kennedy assassination. You always remember where you were when you heard about it. Let's take a short break, come back, and try to put it in perspective.
Okay.
That's Pearl Krasnjansky, the Rebbetzin in Chabad of Hawaii, here in Hawaii. This is ThinkTech Global, the Middle East Roundtable. We're talking about our response to the massacre in Jerusalem just this past Tuesday, 48 hours ago. We'll be right back after this break.
Aloha, I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute. One of the things I love being, however, is the host of the weekly program on ThinkTech Hawaii called Ehana Kako, which means let's work together. I get to interview movers and shakers in our town and across the world so that you and I together can learn and to grow. Please join me every Monday from 2 to 3 p.m. or watch us on the recording, www.thinktechhawaii.com. Aloha and Ehana Kako. Let's work together.
This is Alice Lee Hagan, host of ThinkTech Hawaii Business Education Spotlight. My show here at ThinkTech Hawaii is every Thursday from 3 to 4 in the afternoon. I bring in interesting guests from Hawaii, the mainland, and hopefully international guests in the future. Do join us on Thursday from 3 to 4 p.m. ThinkTech Hawaii Business Education Spotlight. Aloha.
Ted Ralston, folks, host of our show at ThinkTech Hawaii called Where the Road Leads, where we talk about technology influencing the future of Hawaii. Technology, of course, is the art of solving problems. We always bring in interesting and informed guests who can see from different perspectives and different points of view how that future might unfold and how technology can assist us in getting there. So once again, join us 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock on Fridays. Ted Ralston, your host. And please, if you have ideas that you'd like us to address on this show or folks who you think should be on it, let us know.
Okay, we're back. We're live. I'm Jay Fidell here at ThinkTech Global specifically. The Middle East Roundtable. We're talking today our response to the massacre in Jerusalem with Rebbetzin Pearl Krasnjansky of Chabad in Hawaii, who cares a lot about this, as I do. So Pearl, let's try to put it in perspective. Let's talk about where this is on whatever continuum we can identify. So we have a spiral of violence. A lot of the papers have called it that. We have a spiral of brutality, of senseless brutality, of insane brutality. I mean, I'll use that term. What's going on? What does this mean? What is the process we're involved in now? And is it related to the general devolution of the Middle East? It seems to be, where people chop other people's heads off and the like. And this is a trip right back to the 4th century. What's happening?
Well, on the one hand, I think obviously the issues are very complicated, but on the other hand, the issues are very simple, if I may. Now, clearly, I'm coming from a perspective, I am a God-fearing Jew. I'm a religiously observant woman who practices Judaism. I believe in the Torah, which Christians call the Old Testament, and I do believe a majority of people around the world will not contest the validity of what everybody calls the Bible, right? The most best-selling book of all time. And the problem here is that there are two peoples that want one land. The problem with our perception of the issue is that it's usually related, our contemporary discussion revolves around yesterday's headline, when this is an issue that actually goes back for thousands of years. To try to simplify it and talk about what happened yesterday, you talk about the spiral of violence, and I'm assuming that later we'll talk about the media bias against Israel. I'm totally against not in favor of the terms that the media uses to describe what's going on in Israel. I think the terms used by mainstream media are highly incorrect, slanted, and I will leave that for later. But the general discussion, as I said, generally is a reaction to what happened yesterday or last week or last month or last year, when really the problem goes way back when. Israel did not acquire this land yesterday. It didn't even acquire this land a decade ago. It didn't even acquire this land in 1948. Yes, in 1948, the UN partitioned the land, which incidentally, the United Nations offered the Arab people living in that land at the time a huge chunk of real estate, about 50%. They said no. They said, we want it all. And I think this is what the Western mind needs to comprehend. They want it all. They don't just want Gaza. They got Gaza. It's not enough. They don't just want the West Bank. They got the West Bank. It's not enough. They don't just want Jerusalem. If you look around the world at pro-Palestinian protests, look at what they are saying and listen to the words. They're saying from sea to sea. What does that mean? That means that they want the eradication of Israel. It is in the charter of the PLO. Even recognizing Israel's existence is something that is not a given. This is unheard of. The land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. The land of Israel was given to our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And all of the three major religions in the world, Jews, Christians, and even Muslims, believe in the authenticity and veracity of the Bible. It's called by different names. You can call it the Bible, the Old Testament, we call it the Torah. In Leviticus chapter 26, verse 3 through 6, God gives a recipe for how to achieve peace upon the land. But before I go to the recipe, earlier, much earlier, when Abraham, the first Jew, traveled to the land of Canaan, God said, I will give this land to your children and their children after them. And yes, Ishmael was his child. But even Ishmael exceeded at the end of his life that this land passed on through Isaac, and from Isaac through Jacob, and from Jacob through the 12 tribes, and thereon, if you follow biblical history, to the Israelites. Who were the Israelites? The Israelites were the Jews. This land belongs to the Jewish people. Other peoples are welcome to live as citizens, achieve equal rights, which they do not have anywhere else in the Middle East. It's the only democracy, as we both know. But the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. Once that is stated clearly, then we can work from that premise. And until that is stated clearly, there's no conversation. We're talking at each other. The Arabs living in Israel want the destruction of Israel. You have a bizarre situation where you have members of Knesset, of the Israeli parliament, who are Arabs. This is unheard of. Jews are not allowed to live in other Arab countries. Forget about be part of the legislating body. In Israel, you have Arabs that are members of Knesset, and they are preaching against the government which they serve. This is unheard of. This is insanity. In the United States government, if you would have a senator preaching traitorous acts against the U.S. government, if you would have a senator preaching an uprising against the U.S. government, that senator's status would be revoked in a second. That senator's citizenship would be called into question. Whereas in Israel, that's the status quo. We need to question the status quo. There is something very wrong because the acceptance of the status quo is what has led to what you call, Jay, the spiral of violence. And I do not call it the spiral of violence. I call it Arab violence against Israeli Jews, and Israel legally, legitimately, and sensibly defending its citizens. A government that cannot defend the safety of its citizens, that cannot guarantee basic protection of a citizen that walks in a street or prays at his or her place of worship, that government really needs to take an honest look at itself and what it is doing. The status quo is no good. It has to change.
Has Israel gotten a little softer than it was in 1948?
I believe so. I believe that the people and the governing bodies are tired. Israel has only wanted peace. Israel has made numerous overtures and numerous concessions. And if you'll allow me to, I would like to discuss for a moment the folly of concessions. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was a strong lover of Zion and of Israel. And he spoke often and passionately about the need for Israel to maintain strong borders and strong self-defense. We all know in our own lives how necessary borders are. A marriage with no borders is not a marriage. A family with no borders allows for an invasion of its privacy. A country that does not have strong borders has no security. Israel has enemies massing on its borders since the day of its UN recognition in 1948. That's a long time. That's almost 70 years. People are tired, justifiably so. People have lost sons and daughters, and the Israelis, the Jewish citizens of Israel, genuinely want peace and have done what's above and beyond rational, even at the expense of the safety of its own citizens, to try and achieve peace. And every time that the Israeli government has made concessions from Camp David and on, which Camp David was celebrated at the time. I remember the New York Times headlines in 1979, I believe it was, either 77 or 79, when Menachem Begin, the then Prime Minister, came to America to sign the Camp David Accords with Anwar Sadat, the then leader of Egypt. The Rebbe was the lone voice crying about the folly of giving away so much for paper promises. And the Rebbe said things 30, 35, 40 years ago that seem prophetic in hindsight. And the Rebbe specifically spoke about Egypt. And he said they signed a piece of paper. What is that worth? It's only promises. Israel gave away the entire Sinai. There were the only oil fields that Israel possessed. Today, Israel pays millions and millions of dollars to buy oil. It gave away the oil fields to Egypt. It gave away Yamit.
For peace.
For peace. For peace.
So after all these concessions, there's no peace.
Absolutely not, because concessions are a sign of weakness. And
In the Middle East.
In the Middle East. And I think the Western mind really does not understand the Arab mindset in the Middle East, because there is also a whole double standard in reporting what goes on. I'm not talking about the Western media, we'll get to that soon, but what happens in the Arab world. The Arab leaders, including Mahmoud Abbas, is saying one thing in Arabic and another thing in English for Western consumption, okay? When they speak in Arabic, they speak very clearly. They are raising an entire generation to hate Jews.
It's all about
simply.
hatred.
Hatred and killing. Jews love life. Our Torah, our Bible, mandates love of life. We will do anything to preserve a life, even to the point of giving hospitalized care to our Arab enemies that are fighting us at the moment. Ismail Haniyeh, who is one of the leaders of Hamas, has his daughter being treated in an Israeli hospital. His mother-in-law is being treated by Israelis. When Israel was fighting in Gaza this summer, they took in Palestinian children and Palestinian adults who were wounded and treated them in Israeli hospitals. Do you see a Jew allowed to enter Gaza? Forget about being treated there. Where's the reciprocity? The only thing that they understand is strength. And unfortunately, for the last 40 years, the Israeli government has displayed weakness by giving, all in the hopes of peace. And what we've gotten instead, Jay, as you can see, is war and bloodshed and killing, devolving into the barbaric murder that occurred just 2 days ago. And these are Arab citizens of Israel. They have Israeli citizenship cards. They live in Jerusalem. They work in Jerusalem. They were being employed by a grocer. And they took meat cleavers to people.
There's enormous hatred in that. Let's take a break. We'll come right back, and we'll talk about possible solutions, see if there's any optimism on the horizon. That's Rebbetzin Pearl Krasnjansky of Chabad of Hawaii, the Rebbetzin of Rabbi Itchel Krasnjansky of Chabad. This is ThinkTech Global, the Middle East Roundtable, and we're talking about our response to the massacre just 48 hours ago in Jerusalem. David Day is off today, and I'm hosting. We'll be right back.
Aloha, my name is Kenneth Lawson. I'm your host here at Life in the Law. I'm really interested in law as I practiced it for 18 years before coming to Hawaii. I practiced criminal law and civil rights law on the mainland. Now I teach law at the University of Hawaii Law School, William S. Richardson School of Law. and I bring in guests who are very current on legal issues that affect your life here in Hawaii. Come and join me every Wednesday at 1 p.m. as we explore how the law affects you, how the law is changing, and why it's important that you should care about what's going on in your community. See you then.
Okay, we're back. We're live. I'm Jay Fidell here at ThinkTech Global, and we're talking about the Middle East Roundtable, our response to the massacre in Jerusalem just 2 days ago, with Rebbetzin Pearl Krasnjansky of Chabad of Hawaii. You were talking before the break about something you had on your phone. What was that? What was that?
Okay, so I actually wanted to share with your watchers. You had asked before about peace, and is there a solution for peace? And as I said earlier, the Rebbe was a great lover of Zion and a great lover of peace for all peoples, not just for the Jewish people in Israel, but for its non-Jewish citizens. And the Rebbe over and over and over again would quote chapter 26 in Leviticus. So if I may, I would like your readers to see for themselves and read for themselves. And if it's not clear, then I will just read it aloud. What it says in chapter 26,
Why don't you read
verse
it,
3.
Pearl?
Okay. So it says, if you will walk in my statutes, so says God, and keep my commandments, and do them, then I will give you rains in their seasons, and the land shall yield her produce, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. Skip one verse, go down to verse 6. And dwell in your land safely, and I will give peace upon the land. And you shall lie down, and none shall make you afraid. And I will cause evil beasts to cease out of the land. Neither shall the sword go through your land. You know, we were promised this land, as I said earlier, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob by God, and to their descendants for eternity. There was no expiration date on it. The Jewish people were originally exiled from their land by the Babylonians, who came and exiled and enslaved the Jewish people 2,500 years ago. Approximately 70 years later, they were able to regain a measure of independence. And then the Romans came about 2,000 years ago, once again destroyed the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, exiled and enslaved a number of Jews. So for the last 2,000 years, the Jews have been in what we call in our historical narrative the diaspora. We've been exiled to countries all over the world. But Jews, for the last 2,000 years, have prayed for a return to Jerusalem. And God told us, if you want to live peacefully upon the land, just do what I tell you to. God gave us a recipe. He gave us commandments. He gave the Jewish people 613 laws to abide by. He gave all the peoples of the world the 7 Noahide laws. And if anybody would like, you can look them up online, the 7 Noahide commandments. Those are 7 categories of moral laws that all human beings need to abide by. May I add, maybe unnecessarily, that one of which is do not murder. Okay? So in order that we do not live in a state of anarchy, so that we have a cohesive, functioning society globally, we need to follow what God says. I'm a believing person. I believe very strongly that when the Israeli government and the Israeli people heed these words, yes, there will be peace upon the land.
What is that you're holding up?
Okay, so what I'm holding up is a video. Unfortunately, we cannot share it at the moment for technical reasons, but these are talks that the Rebbe gave over a span of about 10, 15, 20 years, discussing the security situation in Israel, reiterating over and over again the need for security in the land. And peace, the Rebbe said, can only come through strength. Any military advisor, even if we put aside our religious obligation, which in the Jewish code of law, it says that if somebody comes to kill you, you rise up in self-defense. We are not given permission to go out and conquer other people's lands. We just want our tiny little sliver of territory. Israel is the size of New Jersey. The Arabs have millions of acres, which incidentally, there was no such term Palestinians until 1948. Actually, if you want to go into the history of the name Palestine, the Romans, in their earliest attempt to erase the connection of Jews with the Holy Land, which the Arabs are trying to do again today, 2,000 years later, They renamed the land of Israel Palestine, okay, in order to, it shouldn't be called Judea as it was, because Judea clearly has an association with Jews. Israel has an association with Israelites, so they renamed it Palestine. So the original Palestinians were actually the Jewish people. The Arab people living in the area known as Israel today, they are the same peoples that live in Jordan. They actually belong in the Hashemite kingdom. And if I may say a word about the failure of the peace processes of the last 40 years, Jordan, which is supposed to be a peace partner with Israel, this morning, Jordan had a session in their parliament where they prayed for the souls of the martyrs, the murderers who butchered Jews and left them to lie in puddles of their own blood. Jordan, the Israeli peace partner, they prayed for the benefit and the welfare of these people, these murderers.
Just as Hamas. Hamas said they were martyrs too, these kids.
So who do we have to talk to? Who do we have to talk to?
There is nobody to talk to.
There are no peace partners.
I mean, and the same people are involved in increasing brutality in ISIS and all that. I mean, this is a sweeping cultural worsening, a devolution in the Middle East. And you know,
Absolutely.
with regard to Israel, I mean, Israel becomes the victim of a much larger problem. And it's worse for Israel, but it's worse for the whole region.
Israel is the bulwark which is holding up the entire Middle East from falling into anarchy. God forbid should Israel fall, which it never will, because we do have God's promise that God will watch over Israel for eternity. But God forbid should Israel ever fall, the entire Middle East falls. There is chaos in every other country. ISIS is sweeping through the Middle East. And there was a report just this week again that the State Department has grossly underestimated the amount of recruits. They estimated that ISIS has 30,000 recruits. The new estimate coming from the Arab world, which has better sources, is 200,000. Okay?
This is really serious.
Yes. They want to return the Arab world to the Middle Ages.
And they are also anti-Semitic. They are also against Israel with the same
Absolutely.
kind of brutality or worse.
Senseless hatred.
So what do we do? I mean, when I say we, I mean the whole world. One thing, I read a sermon by a rabbi named Lewis.
Yes.
Was going around on the internet around the time of the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah. And he was saying, you know, as Israel goes, so is the Jewish community everywhere. And so as the Jewish community everywhere goes, so goes the world. It's the same thing about when are they coming for me?
Absolutely.
The same thing. This affects us all. There's nobody, no group, no country that's exempt from this kind of devolution into the pit. So the question is, you know, what can be done short of a world war? What can be done to change this cultural devolution?
I think Israel needs to totally change the premise from which it is dialoguing. Like I said, if Israel, the government of Israel I'm speaking of, unabashedly and unashamedly comes out and says, this land is ours because God gave it to us. And we are not giving away an inch of it, because whatever we've given away, instead of leading to more peace, it's led only to more bloodshed. Israel uprooted thousands of settlers in Gaza. What was it?
Its own settlers.
Its own settlers.
Who were peaceful.
Absolutely. They turned the desert. They made the desert bloom. The cliche happened there. They had beautiful hothouses growing tomatoes and flowers, which were being exported to the entire world. And they gave this to the Arabs in the hopes that the Arabs would build Gaza into a peaceful state. Instead, what do we have? We have a situation where Gaza is used as a launching pad for thousands of rockets being launched at Israeli civilians, not at the army, being launched at kindergartens, being launched at gas stations so that gas stations explode, being launched at developments of homes, being launched at innocent people. They used all the money, all the aid that was given to them by Israel. Israel gave them arms. When Israel gave the West Bank area autonomy to the Palestinians, they gave them arms. What did they need arms for? Those arms are now being used against the Israeli citizens. So we have a dialogue today that is based on an unworkable premise. And if we need any other evidence, the evidence of the last 40 years of increasing bloodshed, and as you've used the word devolution, I like that, because we show a gradual sinking into total barbarity, where all norms of civilization are discarded, where people are being beheaded, whether it be by ISIS or the ISIS representatives in Israel, which are Arab terrorism. You do not see Jews hacking off Arab limbs. You see Jews saving Arab lives in hospitals, even Arabs that were a minute ago attempting to be a suicide bomber. Okay? So we need to change the basic premise of the dialogue. The first premise has to be is we are not giving away any more land. This land is ours. You have two choices. You can live in this land and obey its laws like a decent law-abiding citizen, or you can leave. And I think Israel needs to do something which may shock the world, but of course that's because of, and I hope we'll get to it soon, the media bias against Israel. I think Israel needs to start deporting any Arabs that have a history of any terrorism, and there are many of them loose today because Israel let them out of their jail. Convicted terrorists were let out of jail.
1,000 of them in exchange for one Israeli soldier.
Insanity. That shows how much we cherish life. We cherish one life enough in order to release convicted murderers, people that have planned deliberately to murder women and children.
And who will come back and do it again.
Have done it
Have
again.
done it again.
Have done it again. These two cousins that murdered, they have another cousin who's out from jail because he had planned a terror attack. He had participated in a terror attack.
But Pearl, let's go to your point about the news media.
Okay.
The Western media. You know, it seems to me that the world has been misinformed, not just this week. And there have been misinformations this week, but for a long time. And world opinion is in the wrong place. The world is misinformed on these things you're talking about. Tell us your view of that.
Okay. I feel that the media is beyond biased. It is difficult for me to talk about this without emotion because I feel that there is such a tremendous injustice being done to the state of Israel by media bias. The reporting is beyond slanted. The reporting often borders on fabrication. There's an excellent article, actually, you can look it up on the internet, written by Matty Friedman. He is an ex-AP reporter, and he wrote a long article at the end of August analyzing.
I've seen this article.
It's amazing.
It's also going around the internet.
Analyzing and dissecting the media bias against Israel.
He talked about how the Associated Press, he was working for the Associated Press, systematically spiked stories that were anti-Arab.
Absolutely.
And over and over again as a pattern.
Absolutely. During the war in Gaza, there was no mention of what all the reporters knew, that there were rockets hiding in hospitals, that there were rockets hiding in schools, that Hamas was hiding behind their own women and children, that they were willingly sacrificing the blood of their people, that they were totally inflating body counts, that the reporters were getting body counts from Hamas, who were lying and dressing up Hamas fighters as civilians. I can go on and on and on, Jay, but there is an enormous focus on what is going on in Israel. And Matty Friedman points out to the inordinate amount of reporters that are stationed in Israel at the expense of reporting other important news stories around the world. In Syria, there are thousands being killed. It barely makes it to a blip on the front page. Why is that? I only have one explanation. There is a double standard where it comes to Israel. Whether it is active or latent anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism has become the new cover, the politically correct cover for anti-Semitism. And therefore, Israel is being held to a standard that no other country in the world is being held to. And as a matter of fact, I'm blanking on his name right now, but there was a British general who spoke in the UN, and he spoke about how the steps that the Israeli army was taken to protect Arab citizens that were fighting against it, to protect Palestinians, to protect the people that Hamas were hiding behind. The steps that the Israeli government was taking is unheard of in the history of warfare. I am quoting to you a military expert. Look it up. And notwithstanding all those extraordinary steps that Israel was taking, and I'd like to interrupt myself to mention just one, that when there was ceasefire after ceasefire, which clearly Hamas violated time after time, so they were just calling it to give them a moment to breathe and rearm, During this ceasefire, Israel would transport water and food and basic supplies and provide electricity for the citizens of Gaza, who then turned around and used everything that Israel was given.
They saw it as a sign of weakness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think there is a country in the world that would engage in this type of behavior in wartime. Israel needs to stand up and call a spade a spade.
What do we do with the press, though? I mean, there was some very serious criticism over CNN, the way it mischaracterized what happened on Tuesday. This is one day ago, and it's all over the web. But gee whiz, that's going to happen again. It's been happening, you know, for decades, if not generations. And you know, I happen to agree that you know, this is either patent or latent, you know, anti-Semitism. But it's had an effect on the worldview of Israel and in the worldview of the Middle East. What do we do? How can we, you know, correctly advise, educate people around the world about these points you're talking about?
I think it's important to stand up and tell the truth. Just tell the unvarnished truth. Tell what's going on there, which the reporters in Israel are not doing. And as Maddie Friedman pointed out, some of them didn't do it because they were afraid for their lives. Hamas threatened to either deport or kill the reporters they killed their own. They killed Arabs that they were suspected of cooperating with Israel. They lynched people. We're not talking about people with a civilized set of values here. I think the Western mind needs to comprehend that. I think, like I said earlier, the Israeli government needs to be much stronger. The Israeli government needs to draw red lines, one of which is absolutely no territorial concessions. And if any citizen of any race acts against the government, they lose their citizenship rights and they get deported, whether it be a member of Knesset, whether it be a would-be terrorist, whether it be a suicide bomber. No more coddling people, giving them electricity, giving them voting rights, giving them all kinds of government benefits, and then they turn around and they shoot their citizens, they kill babies, and they go with meat cleavers.
With incredible, unbelievable brutality. So I wanted to reserve a little time for you to talk to the people, Pearl. I guess there's two groups of people that like to hear your remarks to, and you could address, that's your camera, camera number 3 right there. Okay. And there's two groups of people that like you to address. One is what you would like to say to people who don't know much about this. And the second is what you would like to say to Jewish people who aren't involved and don't speak about it.
Okay. Thank you, Jay. Well, I'd like to tell people that don't know what's going on to search out sources of true information. Mainstream media is not it. CNN is not it. The New York Times is not it. The New York Times is not printing everything that's fit to print. It is skewed and distorted. And I say this loud and clear, and there's a lot of evidence to back this up. I would like to tell people who love the truth to search for the truth. There's a website called Israel National News. They tell the truth as it is happening. And I would like people to know that you can support truth by supporting Israel. Know that Israel is a lover of democracy. Israel is a lover of peace, whether you be Christian or Jew or Muslim. If you want peace in the world, you need to support Israel. Because I forget exactly the name of the person who said this, but I think you alluded to it before, Jay. After World War II, there was a German pastor that said something along the lines, not exactly verbatim, but this was the thought. First, they came for the Jews, and I said nothing. And then they came for the gypsies, and I said nothing. And then they came for the homosexuals, and I said nothing. And then they came for me. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know the Jewish people are standing on the front lines of the fight for civilization and democracy all over the world. Only Israel. Israel is the only country in the Middle East that allows all its citizens voting rights, that allows women to have rights, that allows freedom of speech and no censoring of the press. You need to stand up and be loud and be clear and be vocal and be supportive of Israel.
Pearl, we only have a minute left.
Okay.
Can you do the second part of that?
Yes. To Jewish people that are watching, I encourage you to heed the words of the Torah. Heed the words that God told us thousands of years ago. Get in touch with who you are. listen to the mitzvahs, listen to the Torah, become more observant, become more knowledgeable, become more educated. Listen to the prophetic words of the Rebbe, who spoke about and wished for nothing more than peace upon the land of Israel. Support Israel and get in touch with us, and we will help you get in touch with who you are, where you come from, and therefore your support and love of Israel will come shining through.
Rebbetzin Pearl Krasnjansky of Chabad of Hawaii, Rebbetzin to Rabbi Itchel Krasnjansky of Chabad, here on the ThinkTech Global, the Middle East Roundtable, our response to the massacre in Jerusalem. Thank you so much, Pearl.
Thank you, and God bless you all.
Aloha.
Aloha.